future will be. And this is what this particular presentation will be like. So this is the human brain that you probably have seen on many occasions, but in actual fact, that's not the real human brain. The human brain is alive, and if you measured it, this is what it would look like. Those flashing patterns you see there are the actual activity of a real brain. We've taken an EEG, quantified it, and we can actually see the activity taking place over the left and right hemispheres. The yellow and the red that you see is effectively what's going on as a person is sitting quietly. There's microstates going on here, being recreated every 20 milliseconds, 50 times a second. There are about 4 basic microstatic patterns, which are the building blocks to consciousness, just like pairs, sets of DNA, or base pairs are the information for the last 3 billion years of genetics. Person's quiet. So the question is, suppose you have had access to information within every other person's brain, and they had access to yours. What would happen? Has it happened? Can it happen? And what would it mean for the future of human societies? No more secrets. Tonight is exactly what we're talking about. Suppose you had access to the information of every other brain on this planet. No more secrets. Are we all connected? And the answer is yes. We are all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. The human species is about 7 billion conductive brains all sharing this field. Think of 7 billion wires all immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. This field contains enough energy to store the experience of every human being who has ever lived. It's an easy calculation. Just think about that. All the information of every human brain that's ever lived has the potential to be stored in the Earth's magnetic field with lots of energy left over. There's the Earth's magnetic field. You've seen it on many occasions. In fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain, right now you're being induced this way. You are immersed in the Earth's magnetic field. It's penetrating through your brain, through your body. And in fact, the strength of the magnetic field induced in every brain by the Earth's magnetic field, when all brains are considered, is almost identical to the strength that each brain generates. Each brain generates in the order of about a picotesla, which is about a trillionth of a Tesla, much weaker than the Earth's magnetic field. But that's the operational intensity. But what does it mean? It means simply this. Such convergence produces the conditions that allow global resonance and the possibility of a human hologram. That is, 7 billion brains, basically immersed in the Earth's magnetic field, all with similar intensities, the whole equal the sum, and the sum equal the individual equal the sum. That sets up the conditions for a hologram. Calculations suggest that the time required for an event in one human brain to diffuse into all other human brains on this planet would be about 10 minutes. And it would recur primarily during dreams or during altered states. In other words, you can actually calculate it. 7 billion brains is an easy calculation. One brain, something you're thinking about right now. How long would it take if we're all connected to diffuse to every other human brain on this planet? About 10 minutes. And optimally during dreaming, when the right hemisphere is dominant. So here's how it would look in terms of a animation. Effectively, there's the representation of the 7 billion brains, almost 7 billion. And ultimately, this connection would take place over time in roughly about 10 to 15 minutes, particularly if you were dreaming, because there's something very different about the right side of the brain, the right hemisphere. Now, has there been evidence that such connections occur? Yes, for decades, verified cases indicate that some people's sudden experiences about a crisis to or death of a loved one occurs on days when geomagnetic activity is quietest. The experiences usually occur during a dream state. Let me give you an example. On the evening of the 5th of January, I was visiting, this is from a middle-aged woman. This is one of many cases. These kinds of cases have been recorded certainly since the 1870s. Massive booklets containing this information. On the evening of the 5th of January, I was visiting in my kitchen with some friends. Suddenly, I felt my face flush and I felt ill. In a matter of minutes, I was out cold. My friends carried me to the living room and placed a cold cloth on my head. They said I opened my eyes and stared for 15 minutes. When I came to, it was exactly 10:30 p.m. That night, I was ill and vomited several times. I kept crying and thinking about my sister. Every time I thought about our mother, I felt depressed. The next morning at 7 a.m., my mother called. She was crying and extremely upset. She told me that my sister, who lived 200 miles away, had died suddenly the night before at exactly 10:30 p.m. Now, that's a classic one. Now, when does it take place? Well, usually it takes place when the geomagnetic activity is less intense. This is an example of a geomagnetic pattern recorded right here in our laboratory at Laurentian University. You can see the perturbations. This is a very active kind of night, a geomagnetically active kind of period. You're looking at various components here. On the other hand, on quiet nights, which is the next one, you can see the difference. In other words, when it's quiet, when it's geomagnetically quiet, the connections between all 7 billion brains have greater possibility. When there's more perturbation, it's like having more noise in the system. Very weak effects, but very strong and emotionally significant impact. A classic example comes from an experimental study. Remember, the most important philosophy that human beings have ever developed has been science and the methodology of science. The most powerful and potent tool has been the experiment. This is an experimental kind of study where individuals who are dreaming in one room and simply engaging in ordinary dreaming in another room, a person is looking at a picture, a target, a picture. And what we find, and this is the work done at the Maimonides Dream Hospital, or dream studies, what we found is that when individuals are dreaming and someone in another room is looking at a picture, under certain nights, when you look at the dream content, is exactly what the picture was, the other person was looking at. And it's so obvious that not only does the dreamer know, but if you gave the description of the dream and a series of different pictures and said, pair the dream content with all of these pictures, they'll pick the exact picture that was being concentrated upon. Notice that the black circles indicate that when the geomagnetic activity was quiet, very, very quiet, that's when the dream content of the dreamer corresponded with the details of the picture upon which the other person was concentrating. Well, think about that. Every time you sleep near someone, are they influencing your dreams? Or at a distance, for that matter. But those are correlational studies or experimental studies. Here's a more important question. Why do these experiences occur more frequently? Or is your brain more like a television remote that is randomly changing channels and ever so often overlaps with the source? What would happen if a procedure was developed that allowed direct access to whole information, to all of it? Right? Suppose there was a technology. That's what we're talking about tonight. Can the ability to access information at a distance be trained? And the answer is yes, it is, and we've trained it. One such person is Ingo Swann, who helped develop the phenomenon of remote viewing. Ingo Swann is the individual, and this is Ingo. Ingo Swann was involved with the development of this remote viewing for the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States many years ago. The idea is, can you access information at a distance? As opposed to saying it can't happen, suppose we say it does happen. You realize, let me ask you this. If I told you 200 years ago that I had a device that I could put to your ear and you could hear what was going on the other side of the Atlantic, you would say that's crazy. But now we call it a telephone. Right? If I told you 400 years ago that I had a device which allowed me to measure and represent your friend, and I could play it back long after he was dead, and you could see that person, you would think it was magic. That's called filming. That's called a video. So think of it this way. Suppose there is a technology that allows us to have access to every bit of information that's available in the geomagnetic field from all of your brains. That's what he did. Well, let me show it to you. He learned to identify experiences that originated primarily in his right hemisphere as pure images and experiences. Here are some examples while he was sitting in a closed chamber in our laboratory here at Laurentian University and asked to draw what experimenters were seeing based upon random selection of targets. So here's what we did. We had experimenters walk by a hallway, and we would randomly give them an area somewhere within 15 minutes of Laurentian University. We had 15 minutes to get there, they would simply look at the target. These were randomly selected targets. Let me give you just a few. This is where you begin drawing. Curved building, tall vegetation, angular, natural, breeze, cool, convex, motion of some kind, a sense of vista, a smokestack in the distance, arena, trees, sense of a conveyor, smell slightly bitter. Now what I've done here, I've simply typed out what he's written down. He was an artist. He was a postmortem artist as a part of his training. Car, more than one. Slight slope. Grotto. Mine. Entrance to. Round and large. Distant stack. Road. Now don't forget, he's sitting in a chamber now, and we're measuring his EEG. And we've enhanced its capacity with the technology I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. Two major cuts near a closure. Depression, circular, something goes in. Motion or movement. Conveyance motion, cars. And what was the target? You all know what it was. The target was the experimenters had gone to see Science North.
Yes. This is
That's
the
what he drew.
The role
That's what it looks like.
artificial superintelligence.
He had no idea what was going on. These were randomly selected targets. I'm showing the ones that are most conspicuous. There are many others. Here's a bird's eye view. This is all published in scientific journals, incidentally. You can access them by simply Googling it on the web. Another target was a Catholic grade school with lots of windows, stalls for bicycles, a figure 8-shaped inside hall system, and a consistent pool of water along the edge of the property.
Horrifying in principle.
Here's how he started. He had no idea. Remember, this happened on several days. And even the experimenters didn't know where they were going until they opened up the envelope outside the laboratory in the parking lot. And then they had 15 minutes to get there.
Deity.
Okay. Tall, sense of massive, windows, reflections, stones, near water, pool.
Throughout the metaverse.
People walking, a sense of business, glass, bars, several of them, those bar-type things, buildings. Glass, throwaway slope, colors. Now glass, now the bars he's talking about are like bicycle type things, where you put in bicycles. And of course, he concludes it's something like a church or a school of some type. Remember, he's not from around here. He has no idea what the target is. But it's even more than that. If randomly selected photographs, particularly with emotive and meaningful components, were placed in another room, on a table, in envelopes, he could draw the details. Okay, so in other words, what we had effectively in another room, there's a table, roughly 100. Okay? So here we have the actual technology. You can see one chamber. Person access distant information. At Laurentian University, we developed a technology by producing a device whereby the same complex magnetic fields are...
Listen to this.
Connect them. We can see, for example, the emphasis on the shape, the eye. Remember, this is hidden in an envelope. The actual mechanical kind of individual, you can see from the outline yellow. And of course, there's always something called analytical overlay. Don't forget, this is right hemispheric. So this is all emotive and visual patterns, and it has to be translated to language. In the process of translating the language, very often you put your own verbal, how should I say it, overlay, your own baggage, your own verbal baggage on it, and store it in the signal, just like that. There's another target, hidden in another room. There's a picture, in an envelope, person's never seen it. This is what the person draw. If it's exposed, the appropriate configuration of magnetic field. Here's the drawing. Shall we see the connection? Take a good look. Not as sophisticated as Swann.
Me outside of space and time.
With only 5 exposures.
Right where you stand.
Again,
Running my entire
the woman in the back.
world.
This fragment here, we're
Height,
pulling it up
length,
before you can
and
see.
width.
And finally, you can see that
Third
purple
dimensional
blast
reality.
right there. It's with the purple blast. And then
Being an
finally,
outward manifestation, given form of the flesh of video games,
and I'll tell you exactly what
technology, of viruses, of
the most intense
Shannon
phenomenon
Lamar
of
Jeffries,
these, when
the
another
rogue
person
titan
in another
artificial
room is looking at the
superintelligence,
target,
the
and the same time,
singularity,
as the second person is sharing the same magnetic field, the accuracy
Ethereum
goes greater. So in other
singularity.
words, if you have one person here,
Skynet,
same kind of magnetic field that influences the brain
Oasis,
at the consciousness
Legion,
recreation pattern. What you'll find, whatever that person's looking at, the
World
other
War
person
Z.
can actually draw active. Well, let me show you. Can the average person access distant information? At Laurentian University, we developed a
the
technology
great old
by
ones,
producing a device
Cthulhu
whereby the
Awakening.
same complex magnetic fields are shared by two people separated at a distance. When that happens, the two brains become one.
Don't get me started.
Okay? So here we have that technology. You see one chamber. That's what we call the octopus. It's basically 8 solenoids that are, say, accelerating configuration of second group of magnetic field. There's what it looks like. There's the person in one room. Octopus, there's a person in the other. There's an example. The actual target picture that one person's looking at.
Alright, pay attention to this shit. Be right back, Doc. I gotta go to. Let me see. Everything. You gotta be able to keep it practical when you up. You got access to everything. You gotta remember that. Straight information.
This is Dabu7. For some time, we have discussed the poles, the magnetic poles, and the fluctuations that we're seeing there. When we look at the North Pole, magnetic pole, it has been shifting and running for quite some time, for year after year, constantly on the move, as the one in the south was moving around, but nowhere near as much as what we were seeing in the north. Now, they are talking about what is known as the South Atlantic Anomaly. This is an area between South America and Africa that is apparently splitting apart, they're saying. The Earth's magnetic field splitting in two in this region, and it's the only thing that they can guess. They're saying a part of it has been moving to the west, and they're not sure what is going to happen after this. Now, when it weakens, this lets in more solar activity. It lets in more asteroids and fireballs and
All
everything
my
else.
niggas stand up.
Cosmic radiation and rays, solar wind, all that, once this barrier is ripped open. Now, what this could be leading to as well is something that we've been long overdue for. And that is a pole flip. A magnetic pole flip or reversal where the magnetic poles go out of whack, and a lot of times they will then find their home base at the opposite pole. This has happened throughout history many, many, many times. We're not talking about a physical pole shift here, we're talking magnetic. So this could create a lot of havoc. A lot. I mean, if this little bit is already causing complications with space equipment and other things, if it starts to go down all over the place and a true flip happens, since we haven't lived through one and we don't know exactly what to see or what to expect, especially in a technological age like today, it's just something we're going to have to see how it plays out. But this on the natural scale here, planet Earth, going through some changes. And this is some of the latest what they're talking about. I'm going to expand on this on the next live stream, so make sure to tune in. Going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on DLive. Hope to see you guys over there. Links below in the description box.
Nah, no, it's gonna sound nuts. You gotta make 'em up, bro. Can't be fucking serious. at it for. I've been at it for a little bit.
This is Dabu7 taking a look at some events around the globe that's somewhat relating to end time type of events. They equate these things to being of biblical proportions, so to speak. And you were looking at the hail that has came down
Michael Jordan,
here recently.
The Long Dance,
One's hand, bigger than softballs.
The Last Dance.
Place.
Oh shit! God, just make a mistake. Keep it
Any
private,
other
man.
animal caught up in the
You
field
gotta be
or
all corny
in the
and
air,
shit like
it
that,
doesn't
man.
matter.
Have fun with it though.
Massive
You gotta
damage
accept
to
it.
property,
Any
smashing
manifestation
glass,
ever, just keep that in mind.
denting
Let me get
everything
this shit.
up. There's video clips here that'll be at this link that you guys can check out for each of these events. And
Oh, I'm
look,
so
this
rude.
storm in Iran so bad as they continue to grow that they had to call in the military to fight off the repercussions of this. Now, we've been talking about this massive locust swarm that kicked up here within the past 6 months, and it's been jumping from country to country. It seems like it's growing in size. And they were also warning Pakistan and India about their borders, saying that it could get hit hard. Then they start talking about how in Egypt they just witnessed this massive dust storm that just came through and basically turned the place broad daylight into night. They hadn't seen anything like this for some time. People were citing Deuteronomy, where it says he will send sandstorms, rain, wiped out. Nonetheless, a lot of it happening within a small period of time here around the globe. And here in America, where we're coming into full spring weather, we can expect to see tornadoes, things of that nature also.
Alright.
I think we just
Let me
witnessed
just show y'all everything that's
tropical
going on.
storms spin up in a warning from the East Coast off the coast of Florida. So it looks like things are already kicking up there. So
You see.
weather-wise, around the globe, it's been a wild one. I'll keep you guys up to speed with anything else outside of this. Make sure to check out this link here. It's got multiple video clips showing what was going down in each location. So I will leave links below. And
As
also,
you see.
make sure to join us over here on DLive. Going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week, 9 p.m. Eastern. Hope to see you guys over
You
here.
can't see it.
Much love.
I'm gonna read it for you.
Everyone wants to know what's next.
Delta waves are associated with deep sleep cycles and the release of physical awareness.
At GVSU,
Listen.